So I did my presentation on Ellis and Liberty Island in New York City. So why are these important public spaces? They are mostly important because of the rich history which surrounds them in the United States. They also both contribute largely to the influx of tourism, which floods into New York City every day. New York is one of the most visited cities in America by tourists, and many people traveling have seen these places or plan to see them on their trips. The funding tourism brings from tourists is a huge part of the economy, which provides for New York City. Liberty Island is also an important public space because it was seen as a beacon of hope for incoming immigrants looking to better their lives when they were traveling through Ellis Island. To this day, the Statue of Liberty is known worldwide as a symbol of freedom in the United States of America. So more on the economical income of both these islands. So not only do they provide to the economy financially of New York City and create a healthy environment of income, they also create jobs for workers and residents of New York City. In 2016, 4.5 million park visitors spent an estimated $263 million at the Statue of Liberty. This is a huge expense and it supports thousands of jobs, labor income, and all sorts of stuff that help the health of the city. So, access to these islands. So the great thing about both these islands is that they're accessible to everyone. There is no discrimination of any kind to go visit, and handicapped are more than able to be accommodated. So there is a fee to actually go on to the island. It's very minimal. It's around $23 US for adults, and it's round trip, and it'll take you to both islands. It's pretty affordable for most people, especially people that are traveling to New York City. But if you can't afford that, it's still accessible to everyone because you can see them from the shore and almost anywhere around the coast. And then if you really do want to get closer, there are free ferries in New York City, which can take you around the islands for free, but they won't actually port at the islands where you can get off. Both islands also have museums on them where you can go inside and look around, and both of those are free as well. Another great thing about these islands is they actually have an online free tour. So if you can't afford to go to the actual location itself or travel to New York, you can kind of do a 3D Google tour and check it out from a distance. And that is this link down here. I don't know if it'll work though. Oh, it looks like it is. So this is the tour. It kind of starts you up top. This is the light post, and you can kind of look out and see where you are down here on the map. And you can go all around. You can pick the museum if you want to see the inside. And this is the old light post. And then you can see the exterior if you wanted to, like the boardwalk, the main entrance and stuff. It's pretty neat. Anyway, let's go back to the slides. So here's a brief history of the public spaces. So both of them actually didn't open to the public officially until 1990. In 1954, Ellis Island was abandoned, and it didn't become part of the National Park Service until 1962. It went through a huge renovation later on, costing $150 million before it reopened. The Statue of Liberty actually first opened in 1886, but people were not going up to the island. It didn't become a national monument until 1937, and it was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1966. So there's some historical significance of Ellis Island. Firstly, starting in 1630, it was actually just a 3.5 acre mud bank. It was named Gull Island by the Native Americans. It was later purchased by colonial governors of New Amsterdam and renamed Oyster Island. There was actually 3 oyster islands in New York City, and Liberty Island was one as well. I went through a few name changes throughout the years, such as Dryers and Bucking and Gibbet, until in 1766, Samuel Ellis gained property of the island, and he used it to home local fishermen during the Revolutionary War, and it was renamed Ellis Island. It wasn't purchased from New York until 1808, and construction of the immigration stations there didn't start until 1890. There was a fire that destroyed the immigration buildings there in 1897, and there was a huge $1.5 million building constructed, which was very expensive for the time. Throughout the next few years, few decades, there was, different uses for the island, such as asylums for German war sympathizers, stations for servicemen, detention centers, once again, more immigration centers, and then it actually closed in 1954. And then finally in 1965, it was added to the Statue Liberty Monument as a national park. And it first opened to visitors in 1976, but then restoration started and it didn't officially open again until 1990. So there's a lot of historical significance regarding Liberty Island. Starting actually with Henry Hudson. He was the one, actually the Hudson River is named after. He named it an oyster island originally. Then actually in 1667, it got repurchased by Isaac Bedloe, and it went into a new name change to the Bedloe Island, but the colonial governor didn't like that, so he wanted it changed to Love Island. And then actually in 1673, when Bedloe died, the governor was overthrown and they changed it back to Bedloe Island. So his widowed wife ended up selling it to New York City because she was trying to avoid bankruptcy now that her husband was deceased. And New York City took possession of Bedloe Island. There's a very rich history that follows it, such as the Revolutionary War. The French used it for a while. It was a military post for a while. And I think most importantly, in 1811, there was a star-shaped fort completed on the island, which harbored guards during the War of 1812, and it was named Fort Wood. And that star-shaped fort is actually what the Statue of Liberty itself sits on top of to this very day. You can see the star-shaped fort underneath the Statue of Liberty. Finally, in 1871, artist Frederick Auguste Bartholdi toured the United States, and he was looking for locations for the Statue of Liberty. He ended up liking Bedloe Island as the ideal spot in the United States. It took a few years for them to actually get the agreements going and get construction working on the statue. But finally in 1881, 10 years later, foundational work began on the island. And then it completed by 1886. And then it didn't actually open to the public until 1990 after a series of renaming it to Liberty Island in 1956 and making it part of the national park system. So there's important social justice associated with both Ellis Island and Liberty Island. I think one of the most significant was actually the first protest ever occurring at Liberty Island, which was actually Bedloe Island. But the first ever protest at the Statue of Liberty was in 1876 at the unveiling of the Statue of Liberty. It was the National Women's Suffrage Association. They actually rented a steamer boat and protested how they do not have liberty as women. And they thought that the whole thing of the statue being portrayed as a woman of liberty when women don't have liberty and rights in America was ridiculous. They said it was a gigantic lie, a travesty, and a mockery. And it's the greatest sarcasm of the 19th century to represent liberty as a woman while not one single woman throughout the length and breadth of the land has yet in possession of political liberty. So that's kind of interesting. Since that first protest at the unveiling of the Statue of Liberty, the Statue of Liberty has been location to countless important protests throughout history, as well as Ellis Island has been location of some as well, but mostly Liberty Island has been. Most notably in 1923, 2,000 Jewish individuals rallied at the Manhattan headquarters for Ellis Island, demanding the release of 3,000 of their relatives who were being detained on Ellis Island. And that's kind of leads to the most recent one at the Statue of Liberty that I found was in 2018, Patricia Akamuku climbed to the top of the Statue of Liberty in protest of the detention of migrant children in the United States. And that's actually a picture of her standing up there at the base of the Statue of Liberty. But yeah, so there's a brief reflection of the significance. The Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island are historically significant because their history and culture dates back to before the founding of the United States of America. Culturally, they are significant because they are beacons of hope behind the new beginnings and immigration to the United States of America. The Statue of Liberty can even be described as a symbol of the American dream that so many people were seeking and when they were venturing through Ellis Island, also, which is also known as the Island of Hope, as well as the Island of Tears, unfortunately, because with hope there is misfortunes as well. So they are both also representative of dark times in American history, such as unequal opportunities so many citizens face, as well as detention centers, war, disease, and immigration. But yeah, I hope you guys liked this presentation and thank you for listening.